Hi there, this is Power in Politics. I'm David Cochrane in Ottawa. We have an exclusive interview this hour with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. In his 9th year of power, the Prime Minister and the Liberals face some of their biggest challenges yet, as you just saw, including the deeply complex challenge of foreign interference. But the number one issue weighing on Canadians is far more simple. Many say life has become unaffordable. The Prime Minister is here live in studio. Prime Minister, thanks for coming in. Appreciate your time.
It's always a pleasure to be here, David.
I'd like to start, if I could, with the issue of foreign interference. And you and some of your other ministers have expressed doubt in the findings in the recent NSI COP report. But a year ago, when you were resisting calls to call a public inquiry, you reassured Canadians that NSI COP was fit for this kind of task and they could trust its findings. Is it responsible to say it's wrong without saying specifically where it's wrong?
Well, first, specifically, I will always support the work that NSI COP does. That's why we created a National Security and Intelligence Committee of parliamentarians. We needed a way for parliamentarians of all different parties to get the necessary security clearances to be able to look at everything our intelligence agencies are doing. And that's something that Stephen Harper and Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives campaigned against and resisted for years. This is an important piece of all the different pieces we've done since 2015 to take foreign interference seriously and to make sure that whether it's new bodies, whether it's reports or inquiries, that people have the tools to take it fully seriously.
But this report expresses frustration with the lack of action. It draws some pretty firm conclusions of what parliamentarians, we don't know if they're current, former, recent, or existing, have done. And you say you draw a different interpretation. How do Canadians reconcile that?
Well, I think a perfect example of that is the fact that two thoughtful parliamentarians, leaders of political parties, Jagmeet Singh and Elizabeth May, both read the fully classified report and drew very different conclusions from even what was in the report. I think what that emphasizes is the interpretation of evidence, of intelligence, of what we have to do is a really challenging thing, which is part of why it's so surprising that Mr. Poilievre, leader of the Conservative Party, is choosing to not read the classified report, not get the security cleared so he can actually engage on a substantive, fact-based approach on the issue of foreign interference that everyone needs to take seriously.
But we have this report. It's an all-party report, including some senators. So this is a nonpartisan report that from a committee chaired by a Liberal MP. Who should Canadians believe? That committee's interpretation or your interpretation as the leader of the government that's been criticized?
Well, actually, I'd say it is a piece that people can look to, but the fact that the foreign interference inquiry announced actually just today that they are going to be looking into the conclusions of the NSI COP report and drawing further suggestions or steps or engaging with it can actually reassure people that they don't have to take my word for it or Jagmeet Singh's word for it or Elizabeth May or Pierre Poilievre's if he ever chooses to read the report, that we have an independent, thoughtful body weighing in the way we are choosing to deal with foreign interference in a thoughtful way.
But can Justice Ogg reveal any more details than you can, than NSI COP can, than the other ministers who have read this can? She's going to be bound by the same laws here in terms of explicitly spelling out to Canadians what the issues are.
Well, I think everyone understands that when you talk about issues of national security, disclosing classified information puts the people who collected that information at risk, puts a knowledge of how we protect Canadians in the hands of those people who want to harm Canadians. There's always, when it comes to national security, a need to balance what we can say publicly with what we actually do to keep Canadians safe. But we have never shied away from transparency. When I stood up in the House of Commons last September to declare that we concluded that India had been involved in the killing of a Canadian citizen on Canadian soil, that was extraordinarily serious, but that was something that Canadians needed to know directly. And I chose to do that because we needed to make sure that Canadians understand the threats to Canada and everything we're doing to keep them safe.
So on that moment, you did rise in Parliament, used your privilege, your parliamentary privilege, to say these things about India in terms of what you...
I didn't use my parliamentary privilege to do that. I informed the House of things that I would also and did say outside the House as well. It's not like I'm trying to do that.
Fair enough. But why not do something similar now? Because as you say, we saw Jagmeet Singh and Elizabeth May read the report, and their levels of alarm varied and changed over the course of a period of days. But there is this inference, certainly from Mr. Singh, that he feels the existing MPs may be compromised still. Elizabeth May said she was reassured that nobody in the House of Commons right now can be considered a traitor to Canada. Jagmeet Singh is less convinced of that. Don't you as Prime Minister kind of owe it to the country to clear up exactly how compromised the Parliament may or may not be at this point in time?
But that's exactly why we called a public inquiry with a reputable, independent judge to weigh in exactly on these questions of how to reassure Canadians that everything necessary is being done to keep them safe and to defend our democracy, our institutions from those who attempt to interfere in it, including hostile and foreign state actors, while at the same time informing Canadians of what they can be informed about without compromising our ability to continue to keep Canadians safe.
But there is this inference out there, Prime Minister, that there are people in the House of Commons who have been compromised by a foreign state. And there is no clear way to get clarity and certainty on that at this point in time.
I just laid out that the Foreign Inquiry Commission has agreed today, and they announced it, that they're going to be weighing in on it. And that is a very clear way to give answers to Canadians on what can be shared, what level of alarm people should have on this.
But individual MPs who may be compromised is what I'm speaking about. Are you suggesting that it's your understanding the inquiry will be able to say this particular member of Parliament has been compromised by a foreign state?
The inquiry will do the work that is necessary to ensure that our democracy is kept safe and that the right processes are followed. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to find one way or another in terms of naming names. I think there are very real reasons why we should be trusting a semi-judicial process and an independent person who is not of any political bias to be able to say, look, this is how a thoughtful country and democracy should go about dealing with these very real threats to it.
But is it tenable to just go on without names attached to some of these allegations? I mean, Jagmeet Singh has said that there's nobody in his caucus he needs to worry about. Can you say the same thing with comfort and clarity?
I hadn't known that Jagmeet said that. I would be wary of any party leader drawing any sort of conclusion like that.
Including Mr. Singh?
I would be wary of any party leader drawing any conclusion like that. There is a range of issues around foreign interference that our security agencies, that our various institutions are engaged in. We know that foreign actors are trying to interfere in all different parties in many different ways, and protecting the integrity of our parliamentary system and of people who choose to step forward in Parliament from false or misleading accusations that may well be the goal of some of those countries wishing to interfere, is requiring a level of thoughtfulness that is not always conducive to selling newspapers or headlines, but is what a responsible government must do to continue to engage in foreign interference. And I'll remind you, we are the government that has brought in more measures, more structures, more ways to deal with foreign interference than any other, because no other government ever did anything on that.
A lot of people will look at those last two answers and suggest that you are implying there's something to be suspicious about with the New Democrats, right, and their caucus. And this is the whole challenge with this issue, right?
I am implying that interference in our parliamentarians goes beyond party lines from many different sources, and we need to make sure that before we go accusing anyone from any party on anything, there are really important processes to go through. The Minister of Public Safety, Dominic LeBlanc, talked about the fact that intelligence is putting together pieces of a puzzle. And if you see a single puzzle piece, you may jump to a conclusion that doesn't hold up a few weeks later. And if you took actions on that particular puzzle piece that turns out to be wrong, you can do significant damage to our democracy and to our institutions. And that's why we have to be very, very responsible and careful about it, which is exactly why it's a good thing that the inquiry into foreign interference will be looking at this report and making conclusions and perhaps recommendations to us on the way to move forward.
Mr. Singh was on the show on Friday, and he said after he read the top secret report of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, he came away convinced that you had enough information and should have acted on the issue of Han Dong and the nomination of Don Valley North. He's now sitting as an independent. He removed himself from his caucus, and I know his future is in doubt. Do you think you should have acted? Is he done now, Han Dong, as a member of your caucus?
These are issues that were covered extensively as part of the foreign interference inquiry. And NSICOP has its own processes that it goes through. But I engaged directly with those issues, talked very much about what was known at the time. And that's one of the things that is really important in any intelligence gathering process, understanding what was known in one particular moment in time and not trying to apply hindsight or what we know in a different situation to what could have been done in that place. And I think there's been a bit of a blending of those issues, but I'm not going to get into specific cases here.
He said that based on what he's read, that Mr. Dong should not be allowed back in your caucus and should not be allowed to run again as a Liberal.
Like I said, I'm not going to get into specific cases here.
Okay, tomorrow is the one-year anniversary of the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. You mentioned what you did in Parliament last September. You spoke with Prime Minister Modi at the G7 over this weekend. Has there been an improvement in that relationship? Is Modi and his government cooperating now? And how is this encounter different than your last?
Well, I think one of the really good things about summits is you get an opportunity to engage directly with a huge range of different leaders with whom there are various issues. And certainly with India, there are massive people-to-people ties. There are really important economic ties. There's alignment on a number of big issues that we need to work on as democracies, as a global community. But now that he's through his election, I think there is an opportunity for us to engage, including on some very serious issues around national security and keeping Canadians safe and the rule of law that we will be engaging in.
Have you seen improvement in cooperation? I know investigators were concerned, and I know you don't direct the police on this, but have you gotten any sense of whether things have improved in the past little while?
There is work ongoing very much.
I want to switch, if I can, to the tax issue that your government has been pushing, the change in the capital gains inclusion rate, and you've argued that it will really only affect the truly wealthy. I think it's fair to say that one sector, though, that will be particularly affected by this is the tech sector because of the way they compensate their staff and build their companies. You said you want Canada to be a tech hub, particularly in artificial intelligence. Given the way tech companies function in their employees, does this not work against your economic goals there?
No, it doesn't, because at the same time we're creating more incentives and more supports for startups and tech companies to continue to do the groundbreaking advances in artificial intelligence, quantum, robotics, all the different things that Canada is one of the world leaders on. The choice we made to ask those who are making a lot of money. The capital gains affects individuals when they're making more than $250,000 in a given year from the sale of investments that they've made. That is not the vast, vast majority of Canadians. And what we're doing with that money is putting it towards making sure specifically that young people who are seeing the dreams of home ownership or prices rise on groceries and on so many different things, we're able to actually invest more to support them because the system is not getting more fair, and we're trying to make sure that it's fair for every generation.
But if a tech company that wants to get into artificial intelligence is starting from the ground up, these are not existing companies really at scale in our economy at this point in time, they will go where the tax opportunities are more favorable, will they not? Do you not create a disincentive for them to come to Canada based on this new structure?
If someone's only going on where they can make the most profits in the world, they'll go to a zero tax location somewhere on an island somewhere. But if they want to actually build a company that has a world-class talent pool to draw from, a a place that offers extraordinary supports and competitive opportunities and quality of life for everyone, for all their workers and their executives, they come to Canada. And that's what we've seen over the past years as more and more companies are investing in Canada. Last year, we were the third largest country in the world in terms of total foreign direct investment because companies, including in the tech sector, are choosing to come and invest in Canada. And this making sure that young people have a fairer chance is not going to dissuade people. On the contrary, it's the kind of thing that makes for more stable and fairer societies that people want to be part of.
On the people who claim a capital gains in excess of $250,000 on an annual basis, I'm sure your math is right on that. That is a very small percentage of the population, but there have been a lot of concerns made by people who are self-employed or they work in the private sector and they've made investments in rental properties and other real estate and other assets that they intended to sell for their retirement. And I know there's a change in the lifetime capital gains exemption that is designed to shelter against that when in particular it's a family business. But there are a lot of people who still believe and have done the math that they are going to be worse off with this, that they've planned for retirement and this changes the game on them.
I think there's a lot of people who are going to be affected by this, who are extremely wealthy, who see this as something that is going to make a material difference in them because they are making such a significant amount of money, who are trying to convince everyone else that there's a lot more people who are going to be affected by this than not. My challenge, and I've spoken with MPs with this, and I've spoken with a number of people, that when people actually do the math and see what is actually this is going to cost them, they will see that it is hard to hold an argument when we have young people who, this generation, unlike just 20 years ago, can't even imagine buying a home right now, can't get into the housing market, can't see the kinds of opportunities that previous generations had. I understand that people who've made very, very well in their life don't want to get a little less in the way of profits. But this is a fundamental choice around a fairer society and a fairer community and a fairer economy, and making sure that we can invest in the most ambitious housing plan this country has ever seen to respond to the pressures around density, around public lands, around all the different things, the support for renters, protections of renters. These are things that are making a huge difference that are being paid for by asking the wealthiest who've done really well to pay a little bit more, or not even pay more, to make a little less in profits when they sell profitable investments. And that's something that the fact that the Conservatives are choosing, who talk about affordability every day in the House, but suddenly say, oh yeah, no, but we don't want to ask those who've done really well in this economy to make a little less so that those who are struggling can do better. Is I think, untenable.
Okay, so it's about a $20 billion revenue take from the capital gains inclusion increase over the next 4 or 5 years, if I remember it correctly. The housing plan that you talked about, we've got the first steps on pharmacare. There's the dental rollout. There's still a deficit on the books of between $40 and $50 billion. You've made commitments to NATO. The expectation is there'll be further commitments to NATO. This is tens of billions of dollars. Beyond this, can Canada live up to all of the commitments you're making as a government without the expectation of some sort of broad-based tax increase for everyone to pay for these things? Because the deficits are there and the costs, the future cost obligations are still there.
Canada has the best balance sheet in the G7 right now. We have the lowest deficit. We have the lowest debt to GDP ratio. We're the third largest AAA economy in the world with a better outlook than the United States. We have one of the best fiscal balance sheets of any of our peer countries. And our choice, as we're seeing inflation come down, because we have been responsible to drive inflation down, and the Bank of Canada is responding with moving interest rates in the right direction, we've made the choice to take that strong balance sheet and invest in Canadians who are hurting right now because of high prices, because of challenges around affordability. So our decision to make sure that we're investing in housing for young people, that we're doing this in an extremely ambitious way that challenges municipalities and provinces to step up as well, that we're delivering on dental care. Right now, over 200,000 seniors have had access to dental care in just the past 6 weeks. This is making a huge difference because we all know the cost of dental care has gone up over the past years, and suddenly it's affordable for hundreds of thousands and millions of people still coming on board on that. We're talking about delivering on free insulin, delivering on free contraceptive medications. We've driven childcare costs down to in half across the country, down to $10 a day in many places, and Conservatives have chosen to vote against every single one of those measures and campaign against all those measures every time because they think that cuts are the best way to help Canadians. We know that if we have a strong economy as we do and Canadians are hurting, the best thing to do is take that strong economy and put it in service of Canadians who need support.
Despite the measures you've just outlined there that you've done to make life more affordable, the cost of many, many things have gone up. And while the inflation crisis may be over, the cost of living crisis is still there. Things are baked in, housing, rent is still too expensive. This has affected the political mood of the country, right? And your party, as the governing party, has suffered from it.
But even when you say baked in, the measures we are delivering are actually ways that are taking pressure off of families' balance sheets.
But groceries are still high. You know,
yes,
things are still
but we're
up,
delivering a national food program that's going to save $800 a year to lower-income families because we're delivering for 400,000 more kids across the country. So there is no one silver bullet. The cost of living is up all around the world. We were all talking about that at the G7, that everyone's facing challenges. But they hear about Canada's $10 a day childcare. They hear about the investments we're making in greater density to push local and regional governments to be investing in more housing, to unlock affordable housing. These are things that we are doing that are going to make a material difference in people's lives. And the big difference, I know you want to go to the political side of things.
I do.
The big difference between what Mr. Poilievre is putting forward for young people and what we are, or for all Canadians, he wants to keep Canadians angry. We are focused on solving the challenges they're facing. And that is a very clear contrast that Canadians are seeing.
It's been about a year, though, since Canadians got really angry about this. And you saw the polls diverge because you and the Conservatives were kind of neck and neck. And now it's been a consistent year of leads for Mr. Poilievre and his Conservatives. The parlor game, as you know, is the conversation of why you should quit and when you should leave. And you say you're staying. So what is it you want to do in a fourth term that you couldn't do in the first three?
Oh no, it's continuing to meet the moment for Canadians. It's continuing to know that what we've done over the past years, whether it was raising taxes on the wealthiest and lowering them for the middle class, whether it was delivering on a Canada Child benefit that has lifted hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty and made a huge difference across the country, whether it was being there to support Canadians during the pandemic and yet still have the fastest bounce back on jobs of any of our peer countries, delivering on childcare, delivering on all the things that are giving those opportunities to young people who, quite frankly, don't feel like they are getting the opportunities they need to have. There is a lot more fighting to do. At the same time, there are incredible opportunities. What we're seeing in terms of drawing in investment in a green economy that is giving opportunities for small towns across the country to suddenly see factories starting up, good manufacturing jobs come back, the way we're seeing economic reconciliation move forward in real ways for Indigenous communities, the way we're seeing the opportunities for young people to actually get back on track in terms of owning a home. There's lots to do on top of the exciting things around AI and quantum and technology that Canada can lead on and around the world.
But despite that optimistic picture, I mean, the country is still angry. You can see it in the mood. And increasingly, Prime Minister, a lot of them are mad at you, right? I know you say you want to beat Pierre Poilievre. You keep coming back to that. But what if you are the reason the Liberals can't beat the Conservatives in the next election? Where do you factor that into your thought process?
Well, I think, first of all, Canadians are not in a decision mode right now. You know, what you tell a pollster if they ever manage to reach you is very different from the choice Canadians end up making in an election campaign. And fundamentally, and it's not just Canada, but everywhere around the world, and indeed I was talking with other leaders at the G7 and in Switzerland at the Peace Conference for Ukraine, everywhere people are struggling with high inflation, with cost of living issues, with interest rates, with housing challenges, with childcare challenges, all these things. We are doing better than many countries. doesn't make a difference to someone who can't pay for their groceries, but the way people are everywhere facing a certain amount of frustration. And I truly believe that as we choose to step up on solving those challenges, to contrast with a political vision that so far consists from the Conservatives of just making people more angry and saying everything is broken, I know Canadians are pragmatic people who focus on solutions, and that's exactly what we're going to be doing.
I have one last question because I know I've gone over time. But a week from today, it's not going to be a public opinion poll. It's going to be a by-election in Toronto St. Paul's. This is a seat the Liberals have held in its various forms since 1993. It's part of that fortress Toronto that has helped you in the last 3 federal elections. What does it mean if you don't win that by-election on Monday?
Well, first of all, Carolyn Bennett has been an extraordinary leader in that community for so many years. I'm really excited about having her as ambassador to Denmark right now, and she's doing a great job. But the legacy there of thoughtful, strong leadership is going to be well carried by Leslie Church. We have, it's an important campaign. People are getting out at the doors. People are working hard. We don't take any corner of the country for granted, no matter what our lead in the polls is, and we're going to work through the finish line on this one.
It feels like a must-win for your party, though. Is it fair to describe it as that?
Every electoral contest is a must-win for any political party, and that's what we're going to keep doing.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, I appreciate you coming in today. Thank you, sir.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, David.
More Power and Politics coming up right after this break. The Power panel has been listening in, and we're going to get their reaction to our exclusive sit-down with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau.